Hi guys. For thousands of years, powerful empires erased evidence, rewrote their stories, and buried secrets deep beneath stone and silence. Today, we're uncovering the 10 biggest ancient cover-ups no one was ever meant to know. Secrets that can completely change how we see our past. Let's start. Moonlit riddles of Çatalhöyük. Night settles softly over the Konya plain, the way it always has, without haste, without ceremony, as though darkness was simply another ancient inhabitant returning home. And in that quiet descent, the mound of Çatalhöyük seems to breathe. Its mud brick layers, stacked like the pages of a forgotten chronicle, hold the warmth of the day and the chill of uncounted centuries. Even now, as winds brush dust across the flattened rooftops, one could almost imagine lamplight flickering behind a sealed doorway, long after the last family left this place. Archaeologists often describe Çatalhöyük as beginning around 7,100 BCE, one of the world's earliest large settlements. Yet its presence feels older than figures can comfortably hold. Perhaps it's the density of the rooms, tightly clustered, nuzzled together as though seeking comfort. Perhaps it is the strange absence of streets, the way people once climbed down ladders from roof holes to enter their homes, navigating life vertically instead of across open ground. Or perhaps it is the silence, a silence that feels curated, almost intentional, as though the city's final inhabitants wished to ensure that only fragments of their story remained. Tonight, if one stands quietly upon the ancient mound, the wind carries a faint scent of the surrounding steppe, dry grasses, distant wood smoke, and a cooling earth. In that drifting air, imagination folds easily into memory. And from here, we follow the soft thread of what Çatalhöyük chose not to say outright. Inside the excavated rooms, each wall is a palimpsest of ritual and routine. Layers of plaster, some thick as a fingernail, some smeared thin by generations of hands, hold traces of ochre, vermilion, and charcoal. Here, a hunting scene. Men pursuing a bull in a stylized dance. There, a leopard with a body stretched too long for nature, but perfect for story. Some scholars have argued these scenes represent mythic cycles, perhaps performed during seasonal gatherings. Others suggest more practical meanings, markers of lineage, tokens of status, echoes of memory. And yet, scholars still debate whether these paintings were meant for all eyes, or whether they whispered meaning only to certain households, certain bloodlines, certain ceremonies now lost. We know that burial was intimate here. The dead were placed beneath the floors of family homes, wrapped, curled, and often accompanied by objects, a bead, a tool, a hint of ochre dust. In some houses, individuals lay directly beneath where daily life continued, cooking, grinding grain, shaping tools. The living and dead shared the same walls, the same hearths, the same rhythms. It was not morbid. It was simply continuity. Yet a quirky detail persists, one that archaeologists still puzzle over. In a few instances, skulls seem to have been removed long after burial and displayed elsewhere, sometimes plastered or painted, sometimes left bare. Were these ancestral guardians, community symbols, or tokens in a ritual we can only glimpse through broken context? Consider a particular room, a space no larger than a modern garden shed. On one wall, the remnants of horned cattle skulls create a ribbed, imposing shrine. Beneath the floor, multiple burials rest in overlapping layers, generations stacked like sediment. The air smells of dust now, but once it must have pulsed with incense, animal fat, a crushed pigment. Excavators found that the plaster had been renewed dozens, perhaps hundreds of times. A rhythm of renewal, as though the inhabitants insisted on keeping the wall alive, fresh, glowing. Scholars have long attempted to fit such practices into neat evolutionary timelines. Shamanism turning into organized belief, kinship transforming into community hierarchy, and yet Çatalhöyük's remains resist simple sequencing. The settlement swelled to thousands, then contracted. Art flourished, then shifted. Burials multiplied, then paused. There is a sense of a city always negotiating. Identity not primitive, not advanced, but something more ambivalent, more fluid. As we noted earlier in the outline, much here seems deliberately complex, as though the inhabitants wove their lives in layers that defy our preference for clean beginnings and endings. Even the architecture suggests intention. Houses built over houses, each new floor smoothing over the earlier one until a structure became both memory and present moment. No ruler's palace has been found, No central administrative hall, no grand monument standing above the rest. If leadership existed, it flowed quietly, unseen in the archaeological record. But one cannot ignore the tension that emerges when a place reveals only fragments. Nearby archaeologists discovered a painting red, black, white, thought by some to depict an erupting volcano behind twin-peaked hills. If true, it might represent Hassan Dagh, a volcano that did erupt around the settlement's occupation. But others argue the scene is simply symbolic, perhaps an abstract motif mistaken for landscape. Scholars still debate whether the painting records a real event, or whether modern eyes are too eager to find naturalism where ancient minds operated differently. The uncertainty is gentle, persistent, a reminder that we interpret from afar. There is also the curious matter of the figurines. Many small clay figures, some voluptuous, some animalistic, some ambiguous, have been uncovered. One famous example, often called the seated woman, shows a matronly figure flanked by felines. Early interpretations declared her a goddess, proof of a mother-centric cult. Later researchers softened the claim. Perhaps she was a symbolic elder, or even a simple household token. Yet one figurine, found crushed deliberately in a midden, suggests a ritual of breaking or releasing meaning. Why destroy such icons, unless the act itself held power? As the moon climbs higher, its pale light drapes across the excavation pits, and shadows deepen in the now silent rooms. The air cools, and the wind brushes softly across broken plaster. Standing here, one senses the lingering presence of lives that unfolded slowly, rhythmically, season after season, each action layering into the mound. A child crawling across a warm floor, a woman grinding grain before dawn, a man carving a hunting tool while listening to distant animal calls. None would imagine that millennia later, strangers would sift through their walls seeking patterns they themselves may never have articulated. Yet, perhaps the most mysterious silence of Çatalhöyük lies in its decline. There is no sign of violent end, no burned layers indicating invasion, no abrupt abandonment. Instead, life seems to have drifted away, thinning gradually like the final breath of a long-held song. Some theories suggest climate changes nudged fields toward instability. Others propose internal shifts, social, spiritual, or environmental. And scholars still debate whether the people left willingly, splitting into smaller communities, or whether slow, intangible pressures made the tightly woven fabric of the settlement unravel. Whatever the reason, the mound remained, a soft swelling on the plain, preserving its memories beneath clay and collapsed beams. And as time passed, stories of the place dissolved into the wider flow of human movement. Only the earth held the remnants. Tonight, as the last light fades behind distant hills, the hush enveloping Çatalhöyük grows thicker, almost expectant. The paintings, the burials, the horns pressed into walls all lie waiting, as though whispering that some pieces of the puzzle remain buried by choice. And just as the darkness settles fully, a subtle thought stirs. If this is merely the first chapter of the ancient world's forgotten complexities, what deeper enigmas lie waiting across the sea, in temples older than even these walls? A soft question lingers in the night air. What quiet truth did Malta's stones bury beneath their own windswept silence? The forgotten temples of Malta. Dawn rises slowly over the Mediterranean, its first pale light brushing the limestone cliffs of Malta with the softness of candle flame. Even now, before the warmth settles in, the wind moves with the steadiness of an old ritual, gliding across the sea, slipping between boulders, and circling the ancient stones that stand above the coast, like a congregation frozen mid-prayer. These temples, older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids of Giza, seem to lean slightly toward the water, as if listening for something the world has long since forgotten. To walk among them at this hour is to feel a hush, a reverent quiet, as if the stones themselves exhale slowly. At Marja Kim, blocks weighing several tons stand shoulder to shoulder, their surfaces softened by millennia of salt and wind. One stone, known simply as the giant slab, rises taller than a person could comfortably reach, though the people who raised it had nothing resembling cranes or pulleys. They relied instead on knowledge, not fully mapped in our textbooks, ingenuity, born of observation, repetition, and perhaps a shared language of effort now lost to us. A gentle light pools inside the temple's inner chambers. From the entrance, a pathway curves inward like a beckoning gesture, leading deeper through doorways rounded by time. The shape of the place suggests intention, a sequence of spaces widening, narrowing, then expanding again, as though the visitor were being guided patiently toward a moment of stillness. Archaeologists debate the meaning of these layouts, wondering whether they were meant for community gatherings, seasonal rites, or moments of private devotion. And scholars still debate whether the curved architecture served symbolic purposes or whether it simply emerged from constructing in raw stone without right angles to guide the hand. On the floor, shards of ancient offerings once lay scattered animal bones, flint tools, fragments of pottery that still retain the faint reddish sheen of their original firing. These pieces whisper of a people who lived close to the rhythms of earth and sea, a people whose world was shaped by astronomy, by farming, by tides and seasons. Yet for reasons we cannot reconstruct fully, they left almost no written record. Their story survives through shape, through alignment, through the way light falls into certain chambers at certain times. A curious effect is seen at the nearby site of Mnajdra, where the solstices and equinoxes send the first rays of sun slicing neatly into precise doorways, illuminating stones carved with spirals and hollows. Some say these alignments were intentional, an observatory built into the very skeleton of the temples. Others argue the correspondences may be coincidental, born of a culture less obsessed with celestial regularity than we imagine. Still, standing there during sunrise, one feels the weight of possibility. The light lands so gracefully, so deliberately, that coincidence seems almost too casual an explanation. As we noted earlier, Çatalhöyük offered fragments rather than declarations, layers of ambiguity rather than tidy answers. Here in Malta, ambiguity deepens, enveloping the stones like mist. Even the builder's identity remains an enigma. We know they arrived in the Neolithic period, around 5,900 BCE, likely sailing from Sicily. But why they developed such monumental architecture on these small islands remains a gentle riddle. The temples appear in clusters, each unique yet sharing motifs. Doorways shaped like keyholes, altars carved with animal symbolism, stones arranged in patterns echoing sacred geometry long before such terms existed. And then there is a detail so unexpected it feels almost whimsical, the presence of small, ball-shaped stones, ancient rollers found near certain temple sites. Some archaeologists believe these were used to move the larger blocks, functioning like a prehistoric conveyor system. The idea is charmingly practical, yet the more one considers the landscape, the uneven, rocky terrain, the more one wonders whether these stones served another purpose altogether. Were they tools, toys, ritual objects, or simply remnants placed by later inhabitants with no direct relation to the original builders? Scholars still debate whether these rollers were part of a deliberate engineering method or merely coincidence layered into the archaeological record. On certain stones, faint carvings take the shape of spirals, double spirals, and branching motifs reminiscent of plant life. Some suggest these patterns represent cyclical themes: growth, decay, renewal, woven into the fabric of the builder's worldview. Others caution against overinterpretation, noting that spirals appear across many early cultures simply because they occur so readily in nature. Yet in the soft illumination of the rising sun, these patterns appear to pulse with meaning, as though they were meant to guide the eye toward a truth that language alone could not express. Walking deeper inside the temple chambers, one encounters niches, small alcoves carved with surprising finesse. Some contain traces of animal bones, others appear to have been left empty. A few contain shallow basins, their purpose uncertain. They might have held offerings, water, pigment, or something symbolic we have yet to recognize. The air inside is cooler, tinged with mineral scent, and the stones radiate a subtle warmth where the sun has touched them. It is easy to imagine robed figures or barefooted farmers stepping quietly through these spaces, carrying a basket of grain, a shell filled with oils, a carved figure kept from the public eye. Near one of these alcoves, excavators uncovered a series of statues, some small enough to fit in a hand, others large enough to command a presence in the room. The most famous among them is often called the Sleeping Lady, a figure lying peacefully on her side, draped in a flowing garment. Her posture is serene, intimate, almost domestic. Yet she was found in a subterranean chamber, deep within the Al-Saflieni hypogeum, a carved underground complex connected to the temple culture. The hypogeum itself is a labyrinth of carved chambers, softly rounded and acoustically tuned. A whispered voice can travel curiously far inside its dim corridors. Some visitors report that the space seems to absorb sound at one moment and amplify it the next. This acoustical quality has baffled researchers. A specific chamber resonates strongly at 110 Hz, producing vibrations that can be felt as much as heard. Was this deliberate? Scholars still debate whether the builders consciously tuned the chamber for ritual chanting, or whether the effect is a product of carving limestone in particular shapes. Either way, the resonance is palpable, a low hum that feels like the earth murmuring back. Stepping out from the hypogeum into the open air is like returning from a dream. The sky feels vast again, and the sunlight seems to flutter across the stone surfaces with renewed intensity. For the people who built these temples, the boundary between below and above, dark and light, ritual and daily life, must have held profound meaning. Some theories propose that the temples were symbolic gateways, portals between life and death, between earth and spirit. Others offer more measured interpretations, suggesting communal gathering sites, storage for sacred objects, or markers of social identity. Yet the question remains, why here? Why this island chain, perched between Africa and Europe, shaped by winds and small enough to cross on foot within a day? Perhaps the sea itself offered something of protection, a boundary, a sense of contained worldliness that encouraged monumentality. Or perhaps a shared memory carried across generations urged the people to build something lasting, something that echoed the stability they sought in a landscape shaped by tides and seasons. As the morning matures, sunlight sweeps across the facade of the temple, and shadows retreat slowly into their crevices. One begins to feel the weight of continuity. The same wind brushing these stones once brushed the hair of the builders' children. The same sea that laps below once carried their boats. And yet, the mystery of their departure remains. The temple-building culture vanished around 2500 BCE, leaving behind no dramatic destruction, no signs of sudden catastrophe. The disappearance is as gentle and inexplicable as the one we saw earlier at Çatalhöyük, a slow thinning, a dispersal into silence. Some propose climate change, shifts in rainfall, or soil fertility. Others suggest cultural transformation, new beliefs, new practices making temple building obsolete. And scholars still debate whether outside groups arrived, blending with or replacing the original inhabitants. But the stones remain, mute yet expressive, hinting at a story intentionally folded into the island's cliffs. By midday, the air warms, and cicadas begin their chorus. The temples seem to glow under the sun, their pale surfaces reflecting light in soft shimmer. Yet something lingers, a sense that the stones are not simply remnants, but participants in a slow dialogue across time. And as we step away from the temple grounds, a quiet question rises. If Malta's temples hid a vanished world beneath their wind-hollowed corridors, what forgotten circles wait farther north, under Orkney's cold and brilliant sky? The star-sunk circles of Orkney. Evening arrives slowly in the far north, where the sky seems to linger between light and darkness, as though unsure which it prefers. Over the restless waters of Scotland's Orkney Islands, the wind sweeps cool and steady, stirring the grasses that cling to low hills and the moss that gathers along stone walls. Here, beneath long summer light and long winter dark, an ancient calm settles across the land, quiet, solemn, subtly expectant. And into that stillness rise the stone circles, broad-shouldered and time-worn, their silhouettes gathering shadows like memories. The Ring of Brodgar, one of the great ceremonial rings of the Neolithic world, stands proudly on a narrow strip of land between two locks. To walk among its stones at dusk is to step into a geometry older than much of recorded history. The circle stretches wide, almost a perfect ring, 40-plus megaliths once forming its full circumference, though some have long since fallen. The surviving stones lean slightly, as if bowing to the wind that carves across this peninsula year after year, and in their posture lies a kind of patience, an assurance that they have witnessed far more sunsets than any visitor will ever know. Even from a distance, the circle appears deliberate, placed with intention across the landscape. But from within, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes space shaped into meaning. Footsteps crunch softly on the thin layer of grass and soil covering the ancient floor. The wind hums. A curlew cries somewhere near the shoreline. And the stones stand quietly, indifferent yet attentive, like guardians reviewing the evening. Nearby lies the Ness of Brodgar, a sprawling complex of Neolithic structures, uncovered only in recent decades. Massive halls, partitioned rooms, decorated walls, colours still faintly visible beneath layers of time. These discoveries dissolved the long-held belief that Orkney was a cultural outpost. Instead, they revealed a vibrant centre of ritual and innovation so significant, in fact, that some archaeologists now argue the ideas that shaped Stonehenge may have originated here in the north rather than the other way around. It is a gentle reversal of assumptions, a reminder that history often lies not in the grand centres but in the quiet corners. As we noted earlier at Malta's temples, alignment plays a subdued yet persistent role in ancient sacred spaces. In Orkney too, the stones point subtly towards celestial moments, midwinter sunsets, midsummer dawns, certain star positions marking agricultural rhythms. And scholars still debate whether these alignments were intentional or whether modern observers project too much astronomical precision onto a society guided perhaps more by seasonal intuition than calculation. Yet when the winter sun slants low across the horizon, its light brushing each stone in golden angles, intention feels almost undeniable. The wind carries a scent here, brine, peat, something faintly floral. The air feels freshly washed, as if the land breathes differently in the cool north. Travel a little farther, and the ruins of Skara Brae emerge, nestled into the earth like a cluster of ancient homes pressed close for warmth. This village, discovered beneath storm-tossed dunes, offers a startlingly intimate view of daily life around 3180 BCE. Stone furniture remains in place, shelves, hearths, beds recessed into the walls. Here one can stand where families once tended fires against winter cold, where children played near doorways, where polished beads and bone tools were left for reasons we may never fully grasp. Central hearths once glowed in these rooms, casting shadows across curious objects. Carved stone balls with symmetrical knobs, whose purpose remains one of archaeology's more endearing puzzles. Some believe they were weapons, others ceremonial tools, others status symbols passed down through lineages. One particularly intricate ball, polished to a near gloss, suggests craftsmanship far beyond casual decoration. Its symmetry is striking, its geometry precise. Scholars still debate whether these objects carried cosmic symbolism or whether they were simply the equivalent of treasured tokens, silent yet beloved. The ground around Skara Brae feels firm underfoot, yet it hides the softness of long-forgotten stories. Midden heaps, ancient refuse mounds tell of meals shared, tools broken and discarded, shells cracked open, fish bones tossed aside. It is these small remnants that piece together the texture of life. Not the grand rituals, but the habits of warmth and hunger, of craft and companionship. A short walk south brings us to the standing stones of Stennis, a ring older even than Brodgar. The stones rise tall, some over 5 meters, with thin, blade-like edges that catch the wind in strange, resonant ways. The space here feels more severe, more focused, as though the rituals practiced within these stones ask something weightier of their participants. A stone hearth discovered at the centre suggests gatherings, perhaps feasts or offerings. One broken slab, found with signs of deliberate smashing, hints at a moment of symbolic destruction, its meaning elusive but unmistakably charged. And yet, within all this grandeur lies an unexpected tenderness. Among the finds at the Ness of Brodgar was a decorated stone bearing chevron patterns, its surface polished carefully by hands long gone. Another stone shows gentle colour bands, reds and yellows still faint after 5,000 years. These details feel almost intimate, like quiet signatures of individuals who lived not in mythic abstraction, but in real time, with real emotions, hopes and fears. The Orkney landscape shapes everything. The sea hems the islands with shifting moods, sometimes glassy, sometimes violent, always present. The sky stretches vast, allowing the stars to spill across it with almost theatrical intensity on clear nights. Under such a sky, the stone circles feel less like isolated monuments and more like instruments designed to harmonize land with heaven. The ancients who built them understood these rhythms instinctively, perhaps through long observation of lunar cycles, star paths, and the rise and fall of tides. Curiously, an old Orcadian folklore claims that certain stones could move walking across the landscape on special nights, drinking at nearby streams at midnight. While charmingly improbable, such tales suggest a cultural memory that once imbued these stones with life. A quirky detail, yes, but one that reveals how deeply these monuments settled into the imagination of later generations. As daylight wanes, The features of the stones soften, and a deepening blue folds across the landscape. One can almost picture ancient gatherings here, torches flickering, voices murmuring in languages now lost, eyes lifted toward the heavens. The wind would have been the same, the sky the same, the stones casting long shadows across the grass. But as with Çatalhöyük and Malta, Orkney's ancient chapter ends quietly. Around 2500 BCE, the great centres lose their prominence. Climate shifts may have shortened growing seasons, communities may have dispersed or redirected their energies, or perhaps traditions simply evolved, leaving the stones to watch in silence as new beliefs took hold. Scholars still debate whether sudden social change or gradual adaptation marked the turning point. Whatever the reason, the circles remained unmoved observers of centuries of wind, water, and wandering memory. Now, as night settles fully, the last glow along the horizon fades, and the stones stand silhouetted against a sky salted with stars. They seem to absorb the darkness rather than disappear into it, holding shape and presence long after the surrounding land sinks into shadow. And in that quiet north wind, as if echoing across the sea, a question rises gently. What other feats of forgotten mastery lie hidden beneath distant jungles, where water once obeyed the hands of unseen engineers? The hidden engineers of Angkor's marsh. Dawn breaks differently in Cambodia, slow, luminous, wrapped in a kind of warm haze that blurs the edges of distance. As the first light spills across the low plains around Siem Reap, the jungle does not so much awaken as breathe deeper, exhaling mist from its canopy in long, ghostly ribbons. And beneath that drifting veil lies a truth long softened by vines, swallowed by roots, and blurred by water. Here, beneath the murmur of cicadas and the sighing palms, the old marshlands of Angkor conceal one of humanity's quiet marvels, a hydraulic empire that once stretched farther and functioned more precisely than anything our textbooks were prepared to acknowledge. From above, though, the ancients never saw it from this angle. The landscape appears as a subtle grid. Under the soft morning light, faint lines appear in the earth, long, straight embankments, rectangular reservoirs, ghostly channels curving toward vanished fields. These are the bones of a system once tended by countless hands, each pathway guiding water through the pulse of monsoon and drought. But from the ground, the pattern is whispered rather than shown. Pools shimmer between trees like mirrors set in mud. Narrow ridges rise only a few inches, disguised as natural terrain. What remains looks less like a city and more like memory disguised in soil. The modern ruins of Angkor Wat, built in the early 12th century under King Suryavarman II, often dominate popular imagination. A temple of near-impossible symmetry, towers shaped like lotus buds, carved corridors stretching into shadow. But long before its stones were laid, the region already throbbed with engineering ambition. Reservoirs known as bares, vast artificial lakes, reflected the sky in shimmering expanses. The largest, the West Bare, spans nearly 9 square kilometers, a lake crafted by human will alone. The old builders shaped its embankments with painstaking precision, using laterite blocks keyed tightly together, channeling water in a choreography of nourishment and control. As we noted earlier in Orkney and Malta, ancient mastery often hides in plain sight in alignments and foundations, in carvings and ritual spaces. Here, mastery hides beneath waterlogged soil, under leaf litter, beneath the moss that thickens like velvet over old stone. For centuries, scholars believed Angkor's grandeur lay primarily in its temples, but the real marvel was the landscape itself, an engineered ecosystem capable of feeding hundreds of thousands, a living machine. Near Angkor, Tom stands a curious remnant, a silent, open space known as the Tre Piang. Nothing dramatic at first glance, a shallow pool, lush with water plants, dragonflies hovering, the surrounding air thick with humidity. But beneath its surface lies a bed of bricks, arranged in tight formation. The pool, once part of a larger interconnected system, served as both reservoir and filter. Water flowed through it gently, cooling and settling before the next rainfall carried it onward. Scholars still debate whether systems like this functioned as spiritual installations, symbolic representations of cosmic waters, or whether they were simply practical elements of a vast irrigation network that blurred the line between sacred and necessary. A quirky detail lies in the orientation of certain channels. Rather than following the easiest gradients, many bend deliberately, tracing paths that reflect symbolic cosmology. Some point toward mountain horizons, others toward rising stars. Whether this alignment was intentional remains a matter of soft contention, but the curves feel purposeful, like an echo of stories carved into stone stories about cosmic serpents, divine rivers, worlds managed through balance and flow. Walking through the jungle, one occasionally stumbles on causeways, raised paths broad enough for processions, yet now held tightly by tree roots curling like ancient fingers. Moss blankets the stones in soft green, making each step feel cooler, quieter. The air grows heavy, humming with insects, thick with the scent of damp earth. Here, near the old city gates, lies something easily overlooked. The remains of sluices and gates carved not with decorative flourishes, but with utilitarian precision. These stone fixtures once allowed water to pass or pause, controlling its journey with subtlety. Even now, one can run a hand across the channel walls and feel the faint polish of centuries of flowing water. And then there are the fields now disguised as forest floor. In clearing after clearing, the soil reveals faint ridges. These were once rice plots, arranged in careful grids, fed by water drawn from the baris and evenly distributed through a network of dikes. Archaeologists estimate the system was so efficient that Angkor could have supported a population rivaling some of the largest medieval European cities. Yet, because the marsh reclaimed so much, early explorers failed to see the scale. Jungle and time, acting with gentle persistence, restored the land to quiet. One cannot speak of Angkor without mentioning Jayavarman VII, the late 12th century king whose ambitious construction spree reshaped the empire. He built the vast city of Angkor Thom, crafted hospitals, roads, and monasteries, and commissioned the enigmatic Bayon Temple with its 50 towers of serene stone faces. Yet even he leaned upon the older system, extending canals, reinforcing reservoirs, and enhancing the water grid. He inherited an artistry of earth and water so established that his own grand initiatives could only add to, not replace, the foundations. Walking through Bayon today, one finds corridors cool and dim, the carved faces smiling, tranquil. Gazing outward like watchful guardians seem to observe not only the present, but the entire sweep of seasons. From these towers, one can almost imagine priests and engineers studying the behavior of water across the land. How monsoon rains gathered, how rivers swelled, how reservoirs filled and slowly receded. Perhaps they understood the movements as both practical necessity and cosmic metaphor, a woven balance of heaven and earth. Near one of the smaller reservoirs, archaeologists discovered something unexpected. A cluster of old pots buried in a line, each spaced roughly a meter apart. At first it puzzled researchers. The pots were too fragile for water transport, too plain for ritual significance. But one theory, still lightly debated, suggests they may have served as early resonating markers, sound devices used to gauge water flow or pressure by listening to vibrations. A whimsical idea, perhaps, yet not entirely implausible. Across many ancient cultures, sound played a role in engineering. The idea that Angkor's builders might have listened to the earth hum is strangely persuasive. Climate change eventually shifted everything. Around the 14th and 15th centuries, a series of droughts followed by intense monsoons stressed the delicate balance. Canals silted, reservoirs overflowed or ran dry. The water grid, once robust, struggled under extremes. And scholars still debate whether political shifts, religious transformations, or environmental pressures weighed most heavily in Angkor's decline. But the truth may lie in their convergence. When an empire depends on balance, even slight disruption can echo widely. Today, stepping onto one of the old embankments, the ground feels both solid and yielding. Beneath your feet lie layers of clay, painstakingly shaped by ancient hands, strengthened with plant fibers, pressed by foot and tool. The jungle wraps around the path like a curtain, but in certain places the view opens, revealing wide, quiet stretches of water. The baris mirror the sky perfectly. Their surfaces are so smooth that a bird passing overhead seems to glide twice, once in air and once in reflection. As evening settles across the marshlands, the cicadas soften, replaced by a chorus of frogs rising from the reeds. Fireflies drift low along the water's edge. A sense of suspended time permeates the landscape, as though the old system still waits for unseen stewards to return and reopen the channels, recalibrate the gates, coax the land back into rhythm. And in that quiet, a thought surfaces. If water could be guided with such precision here, If a city could rise and pulse through the jungles with such measured breath, what other forgotten networks sleep beneath the waves, where traders once travelled by moonlit tide along the drowned road of the Red Sea? The Red Sea's drowned caravan road. Night along the Red Sea does not fall, it unfurls. A slow velvet dimming spreads across the water until the horizon dissolves, replaced by a soft band of starlight reflected in gentle ripples. Along the coast of what is now Egypt, Sudan, Saudi Arabia, and Eritrea, the sea breathes in a rhythm older than empires. Its tides whisper against coral shelves and sunken harbours, brushing against stories buried in salt and time. And in that hush, if one listens carefully, the sea speaks of a road that once existed here, a caravan route, not on land, but woven through moonlit waters. The ancient maritime paths of the Red Sea rarely receive the grandeur granted to land caravans. Our imaginations cling to camels crossing dunes, not ships navigating narrow gulfs. Yet for millennia, the Red Sea was a midnight highway linking Africa, Arabia, and the Levant. Traders moved by starlight, hugging the coast, anchoring in coves sheltered by cliffs. But rising waters, shifting sands, and tectonic tremors conspired to hide much of their work beneath the surface, leaving only drowned hints of once bustling exchanges. At low tide near the Egyptian coast, fishermen occasionally find something curious: stone anchors, heavy and pierced, shaped not for deep-sea ventures, but for slow, steady navigation along the littoral edge. Some are small enough to lift, others require two hands. These anchors, dated to as early as 2000 BCE, linger like gentle reminders of a time when the sea was both sustenance and thoroughfare. In certain places, they lie clustered in improbable numbers, as though an entire harbour once stood above them before the water claimed it back. A few kilometres offshore, divers discovered faint traces of harbour walls, stone lines too regular to be natural, though softened by coral. One site, now submerged by nearly 2 metres of water, reveals the foundation of a quay, where small vessels may have loaded ivory, incense, obsidian, gold, and aromatic resins destined for distant markets. Scholars still debate whether the collapse into the sea was sudden, perhaps triggered by an earthquake, or gradual, the result of relentless coastal erosion. Yet the impression remains: a port once alive with the murmur of traders, now resting in liquid twilight. On warm nights, the Red Sea's waters glow faintly with bioluminescent plankton. As boats glide through the surface, the sea lights up around their hulls, cool blue sparks trailing like ancient fireflies. It is easy to imagine early sailors navigating by these shimmering signals, their passage illuminated not by torches alone but by living light. A quirky detail from later Bedouin lore speaks of stars in the water, guiding travellers when clouds obscured the heavens. Whether literal or poetic, the image lingers, traders reading constellations above and below simultaneously. The land routes connecting Africa and Arabia were treacherous. Heat pressed hard against the skin, dunes shifted unpredictably. But the sea, for all its mysteries, offered steadier passage, especially when the moon was full. Many journeys began at dusk to avoid the harsh day, the vessels gliding quietly over water as sailors read wind and tide like scripture. Their cargo included not only goods but stories, technologies, customs, and news. These were the threads that stitched together worlds long before official records acknowledged such connections. Archaeological evidence from sites like Berenike, a Roman port founded in the 3rd century BCE, confirms that the Red Sea's maritime trade web was astonishingly wide. Excavators uncovered Indian peppercorns, African glass beads, Arabian incense burners, and textiles dyed with distant pigments. One ostracon, a pottery shard with writing, mentions the road of the sea, suggesting the phrase may once have been common. Yet the deeper origins of this watery caravan system stretch farther back into shadows where history blends with oral memory. As we noted earlier in Angkor's marshlands, ancient engineering often hides under layers of later history. Here too, subtle traces remain. Along portions of the Saudi coast, long, straight lines of stone appear beneath shallow waters at extreme low tide. Some extend for dozens of meters, forming what seem like breakwaters or loading platforms. Scholars still debate whether they functioned as fish traps, tidal markers, or proto-harbours that aided travellers moving at night. Yet their alignment with known trade winds and monsoon patterns hints at a sophistication not fully acknowledged. The sea itself shifts constantly. Over the last several thousand years, water levels rose unevenly, submerging old coastlines and exposing new ones. Tectonic uplift in some regions raised coral terraces, while subsidence in others drowned whole settlements. Near Suakin, an old island port off Sudan's coast, divers found remnants of structures older than the medieval metropolis that once thrived there, stone blocks positioned with deliberate care, their original purpose softened by centuries of marine growth. Fish weave in and out of gaps, unbothered by the quiet enigma. Southward, near Eritrea, the coastline conceals what may have been staging points for expeditions toward the Horn of Africa. Ancient texts, Greek, Roman, and Arabian, mention a place known as Adulis, a harbour of trade and diplomacy. While partially excavated, much of the ancient shoreline has shifted. Some paths leading into the sea appear almost like roads vanishing into blue depth. Here, silty deposits bury old artifacts in gentle layers. Each tide lays a new veil. Each storm reshapes the folds. A story passed down through generations along the Arabian coast speaks of singing winds guiding sailors at night, sounds created when breezes blew across certain rock outcrops. Some believe the acoustic phenomenon served as a natural beacon. In one place near the Gulf of Aqaba, a diver recorded faint musical tones produced by waves funneling between submerged boulders. It is unlikely ancient sailors relied solely on such sounds, but the idea that the sea sang to them, offering orientation, has a soft poetic truth. Farther north, near the Sinai Peninsula, archaeologists uncovered cargo remains, timbers, amphora fragments, and grain husks buried beneath layers of sediment in what appears to be the remnants of a shipwreck from the late Bronze Age. The ship's path is uncertain, but its cargo suggests it travelled the length of the Red Sea before meeting its end near a shallow reef. The amphorae carry traces of resin and fragrant oil luxuries prized in palaces from Thebes to Ugarit, yet the ship rested quietly for nearly 3,200 years, waiting for modern hands to brush away the silt. Walking along certain coastal stretches today, the sand whispers across one's feet in small waves, pulled by the same wind that once filled ancient sails. Heat rises in shimmering curtains, the horizon shifts between silver and gold, and beneath the surface, the drowned road waits still, linking regions, though no one walks it. The stones that once marked harbour edges, the anchors that once steadied vessels, the pottery shards that once held precious cargoes, their silent presence feels like the faint exhale of a forgotten world. As evening drapes the coast, the sky darkens into a deep ultramarine, and stars ignite above the sea. Their reflections scatter across the water, creating a second sky beneath the surface. It is in these quiet hours that the memory of the drowned road reveals itself most clearly. For it was in the night, under these same constellations, that sailors once found their way through the treacherous gulf, guided by moonlight glinting on the waves and the promise of trade waiting beyond the horizon. The Red Sea does not easily surrender its secrets. Its waters churn with stories of pharaohs, merchants, nomads, and wanderers. Some were recorded in scrolls later lost, others lived only in the rhythms of songs carried by desert tribes. When the sea rose, it took many stories with it, but not all. Enough remains to remind us that the ancient world's connections were far richer and more intricate than the simple outlines that survive in textbooks. And as the night deepens and the tide turns, a gentle question rises from the water's edge. If a road could sink beneath the sea without losing its whispers, what forgotten passages might still echo through the tunnels of the Andes, where painted shadows guard secrets in the high mountain air? The painted tunnels of Chavín, high in the Peruvian Andes, where mist drifts like pale breath across stone ridges, and the air thins into a cool whisper. The ancient site of Chavín de Huanta lies tucked between mountains like a secret cradled in folded hands. Here, the landscape feels older than memory peaks, rising like silent witnesses, rivers cutting deep channels through earth, scented with cold minerals and lichen. And beneath these mountains, beneath courtyards and carved facades, a labyrinth of tunnels winds through darkness. It is in these narrow passages, some no wider than a person's shoulders, some echoing with strange acoustics, that the old painted shadows linger. In daylight, the main temple's stone surfaces appear warm, almost gold, but at dawn or dusk, when the sun sits low behind the peaks, its facades shift toward shadow-faint carvings, revealing themselves only when light strikes at the right angle. The Lanzon, a towering fanged idol carved around 900 BCE, stands hidden deep in an inner chamber, part feline, part human, part serpent. It is a figure meant not for mass worship, but for intimate encounter, seen only by those permitted into the sacred heart of the temple. The designers crafted the tunnels so that flickering torchlight would play across the lanzon's features in a dance of movement, giving life to its fierce, otherworldly smile. The tunnels themselves seem carved for sound. Step inside, and the world outside collapses into hush. Every footfall becomes measured, each breath amplified. The walls, smoothed by ancient hands, carry vibrations in strange ways. A murmur in one passage can travel to another, emerging as a soft hum or a distant echo. Some sections are deliberately narrow, forcing visitors to walk with bowed heads. Others open suddenly into small chambers, where sound gathers and swirls. Scholars still debate whether these acoustical effects were intentional or the byproduct of carving through dense stone, yet the precision feels too elegant to be accidental. As we noted earlier, when exploring the underwater roadways of the Red Sea, the ancient world often encoded meaning not through texts, but through movement through space, sound, light, and ritual procession. Here in Chavín, that choreography reaches a kind of crescendo. Archaeologists uncovered evidence of psychoactive rituals, snuff pipes, strombus shell trumpets, and ceramic vessels bearing iconography of transformation. The tunnels may have been used to guide initiates through disorienting sensory experiences. Low light, resonant sound, shifting air currents, soft vibrations. Emerging from one of these passageways into a sudden chamber, a visitor could feel the world tilt, sky replaced by stone, certainty replaced by mythic presence. A quirky detail lies in the strombus shells themselves. These enormous marine shells, carried up from the distant coast nearly 100 miles away, were carved with mouthpieces to function as trumpets. When blown, they produce a deep, bellowing sound, half horn, half animal cry. Some shells discovered at Chavín bear carved faces or spiraling motifs, as though they represented not instruments but beings. Experiments by modern researchers revealed that when multiple shells are played simultaneously in the tunnels, the tones merge and ricochet in startling ways, sometimes producing directional illusions, sometimes making the sound seem to come from the walls themselves. It is easy to imagine how such effects might have shaped a ritual. A participant hearing the temple speak, its stone body hum with layered voices. Above ground, the plazas and platforms align with striking precision. The circular plaza, with its perfectly curved steps and meticulously laid stones, was once the gathering point for processions. Its walls contain carved heads, grinning, fanged, shifting between human and animal forms. Many are missing now, fallen or removed, but those that remain offer a glimpse into Chavín's worldview. Transformation not as metaphor, but as sacred truth. As people descended into the temple's depths, they may have imagined themselves crossing boundaries between human and divine, between predator and prey, between the waking world and dream. Scholars still debate whether Chavín served primarily as a ceremonial pilgrimage center or as a political heart, anchoring a broader network of Andean cultures. The evidence points both ways. Pilgrims from distant valleys carried offerings obsidian from far north, tropical feathers from the Amazon, spondylus shells from Ecuador's coast. Yet the site's organization, with its clear hierarchies of space, suggests governance through ritual authority. Perhaps the priests of Chavín commanded influence not through armies but through experience, their temple functioning as a theater of controlled transformation, reshaping participants' identities and beliefs. Walking through the site today, the air is cool and carries the scent of water from the Mosna River, which rushes nearby with steady determination. The sound of the river, filtered through vegetation and stone, creates a low hum that feels almost musical. It intertwines with the faint rustle of wind through ichu grass, creating a natural drone, a counterpoint to the imagined tones of ancient shell trumpets. It takes little effort to envision the site in its prime. Torches flickering, shadows stretching long across carved stairways, the distant call of a shell echoing through stone passages. Inside one of the lesser-known tunnels, archaeologists found faint traces of pigment, red, black, and yellow, suggesting that some walls were once painted with swirling shapes. The designs are mostly gone now, removed by time, moisture, and occasional flooding. But enough remains to hint at their original character, shapes that seem to twist, coil, and branch, echoing the iconography found on stone stelae. This discovery surprised researchers, who long assumed the tunnels were left bare to emphasize their sound effects. Instead, it seems the experience was multisensory light, sound, and colour working together in controlled harmony. As we observed in Malta's underground chambers and Angkor's submerged reservoirs, the ancient world often layered function and symbolism. Chavín appears to do the same. Some tunnels likely channeled water runoff, ensuring the temple remained dry during heavy rains. Others seem too elaborate to serve simple drainage. They curve and twist as though guiding movement rather than water. Scholars still debate whether these networks reflect practical engineering disguised within spirituality, or spirituality embedded within engineering. The distinction, in this place, feels faint. One of the more uncanny features of the site lies in the carved tenon heads, which once protruded from temple walls. Each represents a transitional state, humans morphing into fanged creatures, eyes wide and mouths contorted. The progression suggests a ritual journey, entering as human, passing through phases of transformation, emerging altered. Only a few remain in situ today, but their expressions, frozen in mid-change, still evoke a sense of motion. Visitors often describe feeling watched, though the gaze comes not from a single point, but from the collective presence of the carving's echoes of a world view in which boundaries between forms were fluid. A single historical fact offers another layer of context. When the Chavín culture declined around 200 BCE, the site seems to have been gradually abandoned, not destroyed. No signs of invasion or violent collapse mark its stones. Instead, sediment from river floods slowly buried the lower passages, and landslides sealed portions of the temple. The fading echoes of ritual seemed to dissolve into the mountains themselves, as though the site wished to return quietly to anonymity. Scholars still debate whether environmental change, political shifts, or altered trade routes drove this decline. The truth, perhaps, is a gentle combination of all three. As afternoon light softens into evening, the mountains cast long shadows across the terraces. The river grows louder, its rush amplified by the narrowing valley. The tunnels cool, the stones darken, and the site slips into the same quiet that must have shrouded it centuries ago, when the last fires dimmed and the last shell trumpet fell silent. Yet, even as the temple rests, something remains awake within it, a sense of unfinished dialogue, as though the stone corridors still hold questions unasked. The painted tunnels carry an echo of intention, a whisper of old ceremonies that once shaped identities as fluidly as water. Step outside, and the mountains rise like guardians, ancient and unmoved. And in that high-altitude hush, a gentle thought drifts through the cool air. If such transformations unfolded here in shadowed corridors, what hidden identities lie beneath the waters of a city built on lakes, where floating gardens once shaped a world now buried by concrete and time? The lake cities of Xochimilco. Morning arrives softly over the Valley of Mexico, its light a cool, diffused silver that settles gently across the basin. The air feels thin here at altitude, and the horizon, ringed by volcanoes, glows faintly before the sun itself appears. Among the reed-lined canals of Xochimilco, mist floats low on the water, drifting between the chinampas like quiet spirits gliding through the dawn. Birds stir in the shallows, water hyacinths tremble, and beneath the reflections, beneath the ripples that sway like slow breathing, lies the memory of a city once built almost entirely upon lakes, a world where land was shaped by water, where engineering moved with elegance rather than force. The Chinampa system, the rectangular garden islands still visible today, began centuries before the Aztecs, reaching refinement under earlier cultures of the region. By the time the Mexica built Tenochtitlan in the 14th century, the lakeside world was already tightly woven. Canals like arteries, chinampas like cultivated tissue, the entire basin functioning as a rhythmic, living organism. On these islands, farmers grew maize, beans, squash, amaranth, medicinal herbs, and flowers of astonishing variety. The roots of willow trees, planted at the corners, held each floating plot in place, their branches draping into the water like long fingers tracing the lake's slow pulse. At dawn, the water mirrors the sky so perfectly that boats appear to glide across clouds. In the days of Tenochtitlan, canoe traffic filled these waterways, traders, farmers, messengers, priests, all moving silently along the canals. The city itself rose from the lake's surface, anchored to the mud below with stakes and stone foundations. When Hernán Cortés and his men arrived in 1519, they described a sight unlike anything in Europe. Shining causeways, waterways wide as streets, towers lifting above shimmering blue, and chinampas spreading outward like green mosaics. And yet, beneath this familiar grandeur lies a softer, older secret. The chinampa network extended far beyond what was recorded, shaping a landscape the modern city has since buried. Archaeologists using ground-penetrating radar and old colonial maps have traced vanished canals under present-day roads, ghost channels now filled with concrete. Beneath certain neighborhoods lie the outlines of chinampa still intact, layered under centuries of sediment and urban expansion. Scholars still debate whether the full system stretched even farther south, threading into lakes now lost to drainage and desiccation. As we noted earlier in the Andes and the Red Sea, water often held the memory of worlds forgotten. Here, water was not only memory, it was foundation. Xochimilco is one of the few places where that foundation survives. The canals are narrow now, lined with trajineras painted in bright colors, their names Lupita, Marisol, Esperanza, fluttering from wooden arches. But if one pushes away from the tourist paths and enters the quieter channels, the air shifts. Dragonflies hover. The water darkens into green shadow. The scent of damp earth and lake sediment mingles with the sweetness of blooming flowers. Along these hidden corridors, farmers still tend chinampas, using techniques passed quietly through generations. Soil is dredged from the lake bed and layered carefully onto the plots, enriched by aquatic vegetation. The act itself is rhythmic, meditative. The lake renews the land, and the land returns life to the lake. It is an exchange that feels almost ceremonial. A quirky detail lingers from Nawa agricultural records. Farmers once used small, floating rafts called akali, on which they sprouted seedlings before transplanting them to the main chinampas. These seed rafts resembled tiny green quilts drifting upon the water, each carrying the promise of next season's harvest. Some modern farmers still practice this method, though few outside Xochimilco ever see it. Yet the deeper mystery lies not just in agriculture, but in architecture. Beneath Mexico City, archaeologists occasionally uncover wooden stakes, hard as stone, now driven deep into what was once lake floor. Some are arranged in rows, suggesting docks or boundaries. Others form circles or rectangular outlines, hinting at structures built entirely on water. Among the most surprising discoveries is evidence of a buried walkway, its stones still aligned, found beneath layers of urban development. Scholars still debate whether it once connected ceremonial spaces across the lake, or served as an engineering solution for managing water flow. In the quiet corners of Xochimilco, near the chinampa edges where fewer boats pass, the sense of time stretches thin. Egrets step lightly along the banks, a soft breeze stirs the reeds. The water carries faint reflections of willow branches, long, thin strokes against moving green. It is here one might begin to imagine the old lake cities as they once were. The soft splash of paddles, children laughing in canoes, priests gliding toward temples, merchants trading cacao and woven cloth at floating markets. And yet, this world, so stable and refined, faced a transformation as dramatic as any in Mesoamerican history. The arrival of the Spanish initiated a process that would ultimately drain most of the valley's lakes. This was not immediate. It unfolded slowly, across decades and centuries. Floods in the 17th century pushed colonial authorities to divert rivers and dig drainage tunnels. Each intervention lowered water levels further. The once grand lake system shrank to scattered shallows, then to isolated wetlands. Xochimilco endured only because its farmers persisted, insisting on coaxing life from water even as the basin dried. A single historical record from 1,607 notes that sections of the lake near Xochimilco were as full of boats as trees in a forest, suggesting that daily life on water remained vibrant even as colonial restructuring advanced. But over time, the floating world receded. Roads replaced canals, foundations rose on former wetlands. The lake cities, once shimmering with movement, began to sink beneath the weight of stone and soil. Today, walking along a canal at sunrise, one might notice a thin fog suspended above the water, a soft grey veil that moves as though stirred by unseen hands. Through this haze, reflections blur into dreamlike shapes. The surface seems deeper than it is, hiding its history beneath layers of quiet. But in certain moments, when wind and water align just right, the ripples part to reveal something unexpected. Rows of submerged stakes, remnants of old chinampa boundaries, now resting in cool silt. It is as if the lake reveals its memory only to those who pause long enough to listen. The canals also host the last population of the axolotl in the wild, a creature with feathery gills and an almost otherworldly stillness. Its survival is precarious, yet its presence feels symbolic, a being that refuses transformation, holding onto a form others outgrow. In a way, Xochimilco mirrors this resilience, clinging to its watery identity even as the modern world presses in. As evening settles, the canals darken into ribbon-like passages. The sounds shift: distant dogs, faint music from a party raft, the soft splash of a heron taking flight. Beneath the water, the old lake city sleeps, its causeways hidden, its markets silent, its temples erased. But the chinampas persist. Their endurance feels like a whispered agreement between land and water, a pact that no flood, drought, or conquest could fully sever. And as the last light sweeps gently across the water, a quiet question rises with the coming night. If these floating cities endured in silence beneath centuries of change, what forgotten houses and hearths might still lie waiting on Atlantic shores, where northern sailors once crossed storms to build fleeting homes in a new world? The longhouse lords of Vinland. Dawn comes late on the Atlantic fringe. Here, where Newfoundland's coastline breaks into rocky coves and windswept headlands, morning light does not rise. It gathers, slowly, like a breath forming behind a clouded horizon. A cool haze drapes the low shrubs, and the spruce forests stand dark and attentive, as though listening for something ancient moving beneath the soil. And in that half-light, where the ocean mists curl into the grass, the faint outlines of old turf walls emerge, a memory of houses built by travellers whose story the world long minimized, then condensed into legend. These are the quiet remnants of Ankor Meadows, a Norse settlement dating to around 1000 CE. From a distance, the structures look almost like part of the land itself, low mounds blanketed in grass, their shapes softened by centuries of wind. But step closer, and the lines sharpen. Rectangular foundations, longhouse outlines, the ghost of a forge. Here, in the cold northern twilight, the Norse once walked, sailed, rebuilt, hunted, repaired, leaving behind a quiet, stubborn trace that would one day reframe the known edges of the medieval world. The longhouses were built in the style of Greenland and Iceland, timber frames packed with sod, walls thick enough to hold warmth through bitter storms. Inside, central hearths once glowed orange against smoke-darkened beams. A faint imprint of these hearths still remains, each a hollow within the earth. Imagine the crackle of firewood, the heavy smell of burning peat, the low murmur of voices carried by drifting smoke. Outside, the wind would have pressed relentlessly against the turf walls, but inside, warmth pooled like a protective spell. Iron slag found near the old smithy tells another part of the story. The Norse smelted bog iron here, one of the clearest signs of long-term occupation. The process required knowledge, patience, and trust in the landscape. Bog ore gathered from wetlands, charcoal prepared from local wood, a furnace built from turf and stone. When heated properly, the ore bloomed into usable metal. Scholars still debate whether the original furnace was meant for extended industry or simply for repairing tools needed during exploratory missions deeper south. But the evidence of ironworking stands firm. These settlers were not simply passing through, they came prepared to stay as long as conditions allowed. A quirky detail discovered in the early excavations was a bronze cloak pin, delicate, rounded, unmistakably Norse. Its presence suggested something personal, not just explorers or sailors, but families, or at least individuals carrying tokens of home. The pin might have belonged to a woman, though we cannot know. It might have fastened a cloak during a cold evening, might have slipped loose during a hurried moment, might have lain in grass unnoticed until time buried it. Small, easily overlooked, it nonetheless transformed the settlement from a theoretical outpost into a place touched by real lives. As we noted earlier, in Xochimilco and Chavín, landscapes often hide stories beneath their surfaces, stories not erased, but muted. Vinland's story was softened by centuries of doubt, its evidence doubted, its sagas treated as myth. The Vinland sagas, composed in Iceland centuries after the voyages, spoke of lands with grapes, forests, wheat fields, and fierce encounters with Skrælingjar. For generations, scholars argued over whether these accounts referred to real places or poetic imaginings. Yet the foundations at Ankor Meadows, the slag, the worked wood, The butternut husks from trees that do not grow this far north all whispered another truth. The Norse sailed farther than assumed, explored deeper, and left trails beyond the boundaries of accepted history. Walk toward the coastline, and the sea opens before you, vast, silver, restless. The wind brings a scent of salt and spruce. The waves break quietly against dark stones, and gulls wheel in slow arcs overhead. But if you look closely, the water hides subtle clues. Local fishermen long noted that certain coves contain oddly placed boulders, stones too uniform, too purposefully arranged, as though marking ancient anchorage points. Scholars still debate whether these alignments were created by Norse hands or by glacial happenstance, yet the pattern feels softly intentional. The Norse likely chose this bay not just for protection but for its access to resources. From here, they could harvest timber, something scarce in Greenland, hunt caribou and seals, fish coastal waters, and explore further south. Traces of butternuts, unearthed at the site, indicate Norse travelers reached the Gulf of Street, Lawrence or beyond, where such trees grow. This suggests voyages continued well past the boundaries of Newfoundland, though no permanent settlements have been found farther south. Still, the husks, carried back to Lens or meadows, serve as quiet, stubborn proof. Exploration stretched farther than the visible ruins reveal. Within the longhouses, life must have followed a rhythm of work and watchfulness. The sagas speak of conflict with local peoples, encounters fraught with mistrust, miscommunication, moments of fear and confusion. Scholars still debate whether these early meetings were primarily peaceful with isolated misunderstandings or marked by escalating tension. Either way, the Norse presence was brief. Perhaps the land felt too distant from their networks. Perhaps conflict dissuaded them. Or perhaps, like the builders of Çatalhöyük and Malta, they simply drifted away when the balance shifted. The site's abandonment leaves few clues. No signs of sudden destruction appear. The houses were carefully dismantled, salvageable wood removed, doors and beams taken. What remained returned slowly to the earth. Turf collapsed. Grass grew over foundations. Storms eroded the edges. By the time later European fishermen arrived, the Norse presence had faded into soil and wind, but the Atlantic remembered. Stories among some indigenous groups in Labrador speak of pale people who arrived long before later colonists, people who wore strange clothes, who built sod houses, who came from the sea and vanished again. These stories are difficult to date, their origins gently tangled in oral tradition, yet they echo in ways that feel more authentic than coincidence. A memory of a moment the land itself held and quietly passed to its people. A historical fact often overlooked is that radiocarbon dating of wood from Lanso Meadows suggests the Norse were active here around the year 1021 CE, supported by tree ring anomalies linked to a known solar storm. This precise date gives us a rare anchor in medieval transatlantic history, a moment when worlds brushed briefly against one another. The date is not mythic, it is scientific, carved into the rings of a tree that once grew in Vinland's air. As the sun rises higher, the fog lifts slowly, revealing the coastline in gentle clarity. The longhouse mounds glow softly in the light, their green surfaces rippling in the wind. Ravens perch on nearby rocks, their calls sharp and metallic. Each time they lift into the air, their wings beat with a sound reminiscent of old sails catching the breeze. Walk inland, and you reach boglands, spongy, cool, fragrant with moss. Here, the Norse likely gathered ore, scraping the earth for iron-rich nodules. The idea of forging metal in a place so remote feels bold, almost defiant. And yet, one can picture the forge glowing red against the dim interior of a sod hall, a smith leaning close, shaping something necessary for survival. Evening returns quickly in these latitudes. The sea darkens, the wind grows colder, and the longhouses sink again into their soft silhouettes. The world becomes quiet, save for the ocean's murmur. Standing here, one can imagine the Norse watching the horizon for signs of distant ships, wondering whether this land so vast compared to their northern homes would ever become a true colony. But it did not. Their time here ended, leaving faint footprints that history nearly washed away. Yet something lingers in the twilight. A sense of unfinished story, a hint of further travels, a quiet recognition that the Norse legacy in the Americas lies deeper than this single site. The sagas mention other lands, Markland, Helluland, lands of forests and stone. Whether these places saw other brief settlements, other experiments in crossing oceans, remains a question without final answer. And as the last light gathers along the horizon, a gentle thought rises. If northern travellers left only whispers along these windswept shores, what other secrets sleep in jungles farther south, where obsidian roads once gleamed beneath volcanic skies and led to quiet power wrapped in green shadow? The obsidian road to Quiriguá. Before dawn breaks over the Motagua Valley, the jungle holds its breath. In the cool, pre-morning darkness, the trees rise like shadowed pillars, their canopies woven into a single roof. A faint blue tinge gathers at the horizon, but beneath it, the forest remains almost untouched by light. In this hush, the ground feels alive, soft underfoot, its damp scent rising like steam from hidden stories. And as the first hint of sunrise threads through the branches, something glimmers faintly among the leaves, a shard of obsidian, black as night, catching a thread of early gold. These shards are not isolated curiosities. They form part of a scattered trail, an ancient network of trade routes stretching through volcanic terrain toward Quiriguá, a Maya city whose carved monuments rise quietly from grassy clearings. Obsidian, born of fire and lightning-fast cooling, was the lifeblood of Mesoamerican commerce. Razor-sharp, glassy, and capable of fracturing into edges finer than steel, it moved through the Maya world like currency, like power, like whispered secret. And here, in the corridor that links Guatemala's volcanic highlands with the Caribbean lowlands, obsidian was more than material. It was a thread binding distant cultures together. The Motagua River flows nearby, carrying sediment from ancient volcanoes toward the sea, its waters, shifting between jade and silver under changing skies, once guided traders who paddled downstream with bundles of obsidian blade cores wrapped in woven fiber. These fragments, though small, were invaluable. From a single obsidian core, skilled artisans could produce dozens, even hundreds, of razor flakes tools for carving, cutting, ritual, and war. When light finally pours into the valley, revealing broad leaves trembling with dew, the obsidian trail becomes easier to imagine. It glints softly beneath layers of fallen foliage. It lies embedded in forgotten paths. It whispers from the edges of old riverbanks, and its final destination, Quiriguá, rests amid the greenery like a quiet witness, its towering stelae rising straight as spears against the sky. The city's monuments, carved with astonishing precision between the 8th and 9th centuries CE, tell of political power, divine kingship, and cosmic cycles. The most imposing of these is Stela E, standing over 10 meters tall, the tallest freestanding stone monument in the Maya world. Its surface is carved like a tapestry, rows of glyphs describing rulers, rituals, and celestial events. In the warm morning light, every groove and line catches subtle shadow, creating a sense that the figures carved upon it breathe softly. Yet, for all their grandeur, these monuments conceal as much as they reveal. Quiriguá rose to prominence not through sheer military might, but through control, strategic, subtle, of trade, especially obsidian. The city sat near the crossroads of a corridor linking highland volcanic sources, lowland markets, and the distant Caribbean coast. Whoever governed Quiriguá could influence the flow of obsidian eastward, and influence, in the Maya world, was often more potent than armies. As we noted earlier in the Norse settlements of Vinland and the lake cities of Xochimilco, trade networks often hold the silent architecture of ancient power. Here, that architecture glints beneath the forest floor. A quirky detail adds texture to this story. Archaeologists once uncovered a cache of eccentric obsidian objects, shapes not purely practical, not strictly ceremonial, but somewhere in between. Some resemble stars, others flowers, others abstract blades fitted into unusual handles. Their purpose remains uncertain. Scholars still debate whether these objects served as elite offerings, symbols of status exchanged between rulers, or tools in rituals we no longer understand. Their edges remain sharp even after centuries, as though time itself feared to dull them. To reach Quiriguá, one must move through shifting landscapes. The lowlands hum with humidity, their air heavy with the scent of crushed leaves and wild orchids. As you approach the site, the jungle thins slightly, revealing broad, flat plazas framed by carved altars and soaring stelae. The grass grows luminous under morning light. Birds call from high branches, The ambience feels peaceful. So peaceful that it can be easy to forget the intensity of the city's political past. In 738 CE, Quirigua's ruler, Çatalhöyük, captured and executed the powerful king of Copan, Uaxa Klajun, Uba'a Kawil, a moment that stunned the Maya world. The event is carved in dramatic detail on several of Quirigua's monuments. It was a declaration not only of independence but of ambition. Yet, the city did not expand aggressively afterward. Instead, it consolidated, strengthened its trade hold, enriched its ritual life, and commissioned monuments of monumental scale and artistry. One historian described Quirigua as a kingdom that spoke softly but carried enormous stones, a poetic summary of a city that used architecture and commerce as its voice. Yet beneath that voice lies another layer, the obsidian road that fed it. Follow the river upstream, and you eventually reach the volcanic regions near El Chayal and Ixtepeque, major sources of obsidian, prized for its clarity and flaking quality. The terrain becomes rockier, the air cools. In certain places, the ground sparkles with obsidian nodules, as though someone had scattered night sky fragments across the soil. These nodules, cracked open with practiced strikes, reveal their glassy interiors hard, dark, iridescent. Scholars still debate whether the obsidian moving through these routes was controlled directly by Quirigua, or whether intermediaries managed the flow. Some evidence suggests elite oversight. Caches found near the city's core include large blade cores, valuable items unlikely to end up in commoner households. Other evidence points toward decentralized networks, with multiple groups participating in seasonal exchanges. The truth may lie in a dynamic balance, shaped by politics and geography. Walking the old paths, one hears a chorus of jungle sounds, parrots calling, insects droning, the distant flow of water. The air vibrates with life, but the obsidian trail feels quiet beneath it all, a stillness woven into motion. Quirigua's monuments, so tall and ornate, contrast with the humble remnants of the trade routes that made them possible. The stelae speak of gods and kings. The obsidian speaks of hands calloused, skilled, moving through forest after forest to deliver blades from mountain to market. These were the workers, porters, artisans, and traders whose stories rarely made it into glyphic texts. Yet without them, the monuments could not exist. A single historical artifact offers a glimpse into this labor. A transport vessel found near the Motagua River, carved from hardwood and large enough to carry significant cargo. Its shape suggests riverine trade rather than open water navigation. Its preserved fibers, dated through radiocarbon analysis, place it near the time Quirigua flourished. Scholars still debate whether this craft was used specifically for obsidian transport or for general exchange, but the correlation whispers suggestively. As afternoon draws near, clouds gather above the valley, thick and contemplative. The sky darkens into muted tones, and rain begins to fall, soft at first, then heavier. The drops strike leaves with a soothing rhythm. The stone surfaces of the stelae glisten, their carved glyphs deepening with moisture, becoming more vivid. The rain feels like a cleansing, a gentle reminder that the jungle patient, slow-moving, reclaims what it is given. Under the rain's steady beat, one detail becomes strangely mesmerizing. The way obsidian captures water. Shards become mirrors. Edges refract tiny rainbows. A trail of glinting flecks emerges along a slope, guiding the eye toward the river as though the earth itself remembers the route. Standing there, surrounded by dripping trees, the scent of wet soil rising rich and loamy, one feels the weight of quiet commerce that once defined this place. No armies marched across these paths, no imperial banners waved, yet power moved here, slipping through jungle shadows, wrapped in woven baskets, crafted into blades that glimmered with volcanic fire. And as rainlight filters through the canopy, a gentle question gathers with the mist. If a kingdom could rise from the shimmer of obsidian fragments, what stories wait among the granite ruins farther south, where night fires once glowed across the hills of Great Zimbabwe? The night fires of Great Zimbabwe. Evening settles over the granite hills of southeastern Africa, with a quiet that feels ancient, almost ceremonial. The air cools as the sun sinks, and shadows stretch long across the savannah. In this tranquil dimming, the stone walls of Great Zimbabwe rise from the earth, like the ribs of some great sleeping creature, massive, curved, and time-polished. Their surfaces hold the warmth of the passing day, and as the night deepens, that warmth radiates back in soft pulses, like embers beneath a blanket of stone. Here, in this landscape of rolling hills and granite outcrops or kopjes, the ruins seem less like abandoned structures and more like a natural extension of the land. Trees sway gently in the dusk breeze, their leaves whispering against stone. Birds settle into roosts, offering a final flurry of calls. Soon the first stars appear, delicate pinpricks of light against the deepening blue, and below them, the great enclosure, the largest ancient stone structure in sub-Saharan Africa, glows faintly in the dusk, its towering walls casting curving shadows across the earth. Great Zimbabwe flourished between the 11th and 15th centuries, during a time when trade routes stitched the African interior to distant shores across the Indian Ocean. The city became a center of power, commerce, and ceremony, its influence echoing across the region. Yet for centuries after its decline, colonial narratives obscured its significance, insisting wrongly and willfully that Africans could not have built such monuments. Those narratives collapsed under the weight of evidence, but their shadow lingered long enough to shape public imagination. Only in the last century did Great Zimbabwe begin to be celebrated as it always was, a marvel of African architecture, ingenuity, and cosmopolitan reach. At night, however, those debates fade, replaced by a gentler truth whispered in the rustling grasses. The granite walls, some rising over 10 meters, curve with surprising elegance, built without mortar, each stone shaped and fitted so precisely that the structures have endured centuries of storms and sun. In the great enclosure's interior lies a tall conical tower, its purpose still uncertain. Scholars still debate whether it functioned as a granary symbol, a ritual marker, or a royal emblem. Regardless of its meaning, its presence feels intentional, an anchor of symbolism, standing silent yet expressive. As we noted earlier in Quirigua and Vinland, powerful centers often leave behind mysteries wrapped in craftsmanship. Here at Great Zimbabwe, the craftsmanship speaks in granite, stone arranged with deliberate rhythm, patterns woven into walls, entrances placed to guide movement with subtle ceremony. Some pathways narrow intentionally, directing those who approach with bowed heads. Others widen into open areas, inviting gatherings and ritual. But the true marvel lies not only in the architecture, it lies in the networks that once linked this hilltop kingdom to lands far beyond the horizon. Archaeologists have found Chinese porcelains, Persian glass beads, and coins from East African city-states such as Kilwa. These items, carried by traders navigating the Indian Ocean, reveal an economy far more interconnected than old textbooks allowed. Through the nearby city of Sofala, once part of the Swahili coast's vibrant trade network, goods flowed inland along caravan routes, reaching Great Zimbabwe along paths that shimmered in torchlight. Imagine these routes at night. Fires burning at waypoints, traders resting among their caravans of cattle, the smell of dust, smoke, and warm earth mingling beneath a bowl of southern stars. Some of these caravans carried gold, great, Zimbabwe's most coveted export, mined from riverbeds and hills, then traded for textiles, beads, and porcelain. Gold from this region even reached markets in the Middle East and India. Quietly, steadily, it shaped economies across continents. Yet the city itself was more than a trade hub. It was a sacred and political heartland. The hill complex, perched above the great enclosure, contains ritual structures and vantage points overlooking the savannah. Standing there now, with the wind brushing gently across your face, it's easy to imagine the fires that once burned atop these heights, signals, ceremonies, celebrations. The flickering glow reflected off granite surfaces, casting shifting patterns that turned stone into living canvas. A quirky detail sits within the hill complex. Small clay figurines shaped like birds, each stylized with elongated bodies or exaggerated crests. The most famous of these is the Zimbabwe bird, carved from soapstone. Its exact meaning remains debated. Some see it as a totemic symbol, others as a royal emblem, or perhaps a messenger between realms. Whatever it once represented, its presence in ritual spaces suggests deep cultural significance. Today, its image appears on Zimbabwe's national flag, a modern reminder of an ancient legacy. The night deepens, revealing the Milky Way stretching across the sky in a luminous arc. The stars appear unclouded, sharp, as if etched into the darkness. It is under skies like these that the people of Great Zimbabwe lived, worked, worshipped, and dreamed. The stone walls, reflecting starlight in glints and flickers, appear almost fluid. The patterns in the masonry chevrons, herringbone, and serpent-like curves seem to shimmer with movement. Yet even such a vibrant centre eventually quieted. By the late 15th century, Great Zimbabwe was largely abandoned. Scholars still debate whether climate shifts, overgrazed pastures, political realignments, or the rise of nearby centres like Mutapa contributed most to the decline. It may have been a combination, an ebbing of influence, rather than an abrupt end. The city's stones remained, patient and unsentimental, holding their memories silently. Walking through the ruins now, one hears only the wind moving through dry grasses, the occasional rustle of a lizard, the distant call of an owl. But if one pauses, letting the quiet settle, it becomes possible to imagine the past layered within the present. The murmur of voices, the clatter of tools, the laughter of children, the rise and fall of drums during ceremonies. The stones do not echo these sounds, they absorb them, keeping them folded beneath centuries of stillness. A single historical trace, found in Portuguese records from the early 1500s, describes a great city of stone, inland, rich in gold, and governed by a powerful ruler. At the time, European explorers had not yet reached Great Zimbabwe. The description suggests that stories of the city travelled along trade routes, passed through merchant conversations, and reached distant shores long before the ruins were seen firsthand. These accounts were faint, fragmentary, yet they preserved a quiet truth. The influence of Great Zimbabwe extended far beyond its walls. As the night settles fully, the last warmth drains from the granite, and the darkness becomes complete. Stars pulse above like ancient beacons. The ruins sit still but not empty. They feel attentive, as though listening for the return of distant footsteps, for drums long silent, for fires once kindled to mark the rhythm of seasons. And in this serene darkness, a gentle thought unfolds, that every stone, every curve, every shadowed pathway, carries a story once meant to be known yet later wrapped in silence. The fires may have dimmed, but their glow lingers in memory, guiding those who walk these paths toward understanding. Conclusion. Night has a way of softening the world, smoothing its sharp edges until history feels less like a sequence of dates and more like a living breath moving through time. Across our journey from Anatolia's painted walls to Malta's wind-carved temples, from Orkney's star-sunk circles to Angkor's watery grids, from the drowned roads of the Red Sea to the shadowed tunnels of Chavín, from Xochimilco's lake gardens to Vinland's wind-swept longhouses, from Quirigua's obsidian pathways to the granite enclosures of Great Zimbabwe, we have followed quiet trails through forgotten chapters. Each site, each ruin, whispered its own fragment of truth. That ancient worlds were more intricate, more connected, and more deliberate than our neat narratives once allowed. In the hush of these forgotten places, one recognizes a gentle continuity. Civilizations rise and fade, but their stories persist etched in stone, buried in soil, carried across oceans, reflected in stars. And as the final embers of our journey fade, the night closes in with tender calm, reminding us that history's silence is never empty. It is simply waiting for those who listen.